Let's talk to Isabel Oakeshott, Talk International editor, with us. Afternoon to you, Isabel. It's not the first time we've debated this one, and here we are again. The numbers increase every time we talk about it. It was a million more than pre-COVID, and that figure of nearly 10 million has gone up by over 1/3 of a million in the last year. What the hell is happening?
Well, what the hell is happening is that there are an awful lot of people who are finding life quite comfortable, not having to trouble themselves to get up and go out and do a hard day's work. And the benefit system has not been calibrated to make work pay in every case. You know, there are too many kind of anomalies in the system that mean it's actually better for many people financially just not to work, or only to work the minimum number of hours. And we're all the worse off for this, because those benefits have to come out of the overall tax take, which then means there's less to pay to support services such as GP services and hospitals and so on. And in the meantime, employers are continuing to import lots of people who we oughtn't to need to fill jobs that could be done by British people. It's a crazy situation.
What do you I mean, obviously, if you're, I don't know, if you previously had a job in an office somewhere earning £28,000 a year, you're probably not going to get 28 grand being unemployed. But I suppose if you're living at home and, you know, you're still part of the sort of mum and dad framework, then you can probably make it work, because you might go, do you know what, I don't mind having 15 grand less than I did have, because I don't actually have to do anything for it.
Well, I'm also not at all convinced that they overall do have 15 grand less. I mean, I know plenty of people observe it up and down the country who are working on the black market. This is absolutely rife. And government at every level, whether it's local government, national government, is turning a completely blind eye to this happening right under their noses, whether it's in the shape of all these Turkish barber shops up and down high streets all over the country, or the illegal car washes, the nail bars. It's everywhere. So people who are listed as not looking for work and in receipt of benefits are not at all necessarily not working. They're just not working in the mainstream economy or paying tax. And yes, there are as well a cohort of people who are not working and living purely off the state. And that's a very small number who have been smart enough or lucky enough to save and don't have to work. But I think that's a really very, very much a minority group.
I have to counter that a little bit, Isabel, and just inform you that Sevenoaks really does need 275 Turkish barbers and 3,000 car washes. You know, it's part and parcel of living in that area that you need this level of service when required.
It is astonishing, you know, how many heads that need sharpening, as they used to say in Scotland. Yet he'd need sharpening, that's a haircut to the rest of us. Just how many heads need sharpening up and down the country? Probably not enough to support 6 barbers on the same short street. And often you don't really see anybody in them. So I remain bewildered as to how, you know, HMRC has so much energy to tackle, you know, ordinary people that are trying to do a hard day's job, you know, the builders of this world, and yet they don't go out there and tackle what's clearly money laundering, whether it's for HMRC or, you know, serious organised crime, whatever it may be. It just seems to be allowed to continue.
Something strange is going on. And, of course, you alluded to it there as well. This worklessness that we have among Brits, of course, fuels the migration crisis as well. Companies looking elsewhere to employ people rather than indigenously or domestically.
Yes, and you know, I've always been of the view, I'm quite hard line on this, that benefits should have some conditionality for people that are physically well. And even if they're not that mentally well, but they're well enough to do something, they should be eventually forced to do something. Because if you're going to be supported by the state, I think you need to give something back. So whether that's, you know, clearing up litter, as I've controversially said before, or being made to take a job that you might not fancy. You know, this is something that in the early years of the coalition, the Conservative-led government tried to do. It caused all sorts of outrage and human rights claims, tried to get people to take jobs that they didn't want to do, that they thought they were too posh for. I think they should have stuck with that. I don't think people should be too posh to pick fruit or go and harvest vegetables, which is what we are importing a lot of people to do in Lincolnshire. Why should British people think that they're superior? Why do they think that only people from other countries should do those jobs which involve getting your hands dirty?
Indeed. And also, even if there was sort of a voluntary scheme when it comes to welfare payments, I don't know why it would be offensive to anybody or mean or breaching anyone's human rights to say, right, the state is going to give you £20,000 a year. In return, we'd like you to help out locally. There are many things that could be done, and that would be a reasonable relationship, a reasonable balance between the money we give you, which is other people's money, and the input that you put in. Plus, it keeps you mentally active as well. You're giving something back.
100%. I mean, that's just common sense. And it's also compassionate. Sometimes people, I guess, don't know what's good for them. We're all guilty of that sometimes. But it isn't good for you. And it's certainly not good for society to be sitting around doing nothing, losing skills, if you ever had any, and more importantly, losing confidence. A lot about the ability to get a job is not whether you've got, 3 A's and, a degree in this or that. It's about how you present, it's about your interpersonal skills, whether you're warm and friendly and charming. A lot of jobs are hugely down to that. Of course, there are many skilled jobs, but you can go a long way just by being the right kind of personality. And crucially, by the way, doing something that is in short supply amongst a lot of British workers, which is turning up. I'm constantly boring my kids about the importance of just showing up when you say to show up. And this is why exasperated employers often do turn to overseas workers, because those overseas workers are often much more enthusiastic and committed because they don't have a safety net in the countries where they've come from. They've come to Britain in order to build better lives, to earn money, which many of them will send back to countries where that money goes further. Guess what? They actually show up. And there's quite a lot of value to that.
Indeed. Let's move to this story. Tory leadership hopeful Ms Truss says that the unrest that took place with job security and home ownership says unrest took place with job security and home ownership because there was a feeling that many things were out of reach for the poorer white, particularly male working classes of this country. He's clearly onto something here. Many of us have been saying this for a couple of weeks now. You've visited a lot of areas recently. You've written about areas that really are impoverished for all manner of reasons. Can you identify with Mr. Stride's words?
I think he's absolutely right. What he didn't say, or certainly not in the extract that you just quoted there, was referring to immigration. I mean, for me, the primary driver of those riots was ignorant anger over the scale of mass immigration, which is something a lot of people who are very peaceful and would never take to the streets and behave in any such a dreadful way are feeling. It was an expression from a fringe group of people who feel that that's the best way to hammer home their message. But actually that fringe, in a sense, is sharing some feelings that are common to many in this country. And a successful Tory leadership campaigner and candidate would tap into that rather than falling into the trap that the Labour leadership has fallen into. I can't believe they've done this, and try to pretend that this is only a tiny number of people who've got it all wrong and are actually far-right fascists.
And the crazy thing about this is that even if you looked at, 200,000 people that were rioting and doing terrible things and have abhorrent views on things like race, let's assume that is the case. OK, so how did that happen and what are we going to do about it? Because it's therefore, according to the government's own reckon, it's a significant number of people, might be a minority, but it's still a significant number. Well, in that case, you've clearly demonstrated there is something to address here.
Entirely. And it's a completely hopeless response just to say, well, we're going to fast track these people through the courts and make an example of them. I mean, that should be done to all criminals. I mean, I am delighted, I'm sure many of our listeners are, to discover that the justice system can be so brutally efficient for a certain group of people. Yeah. Why can't we have that all the time? It's fantastic to see genuine criminals being processed and frankly banged up within very short order. But all too often in this country, the vast majority of cases, even when they are straightforward, bang to right, straight up and down, are taking months or literally years to process. So I think we all need to ask, why is it that the justice system can be made to accelerate when the government wants to make a political point, but otherwise just grinds along at an absolute glacial pace?
Absolutely spot on. And there are some curious moments that we're going to be talking later on about, you know, a fella just got 8 weeks in jail for what he posted on Facebook, which, you know, wasn't clever, but 8 weeks in jail would never have happened a month ago. So we'll look at that. Top lawyer coming on with us to discuss that. Let's move to this story. I don't know if you've heard of Richard Tice, Isabel. He's the deputy leader of Reform UK, all-round nice bloke, regularly appears on the station. He appeared this morning with Mike Graham and talked about, I find this fascinating and almost sort of an irredeemable reality of where we're at. He talked about being in favour of a referendum on immigration if it meant not being smeared about wanting to have a debate about it. Listen, here's a little clip. This is Richard Tice speaking with Mike Graham this morning.
You could put a question to the public in a referendum about immigration. What would it be? I mean, could you back that?
Oh, I think you could have a debate about what should the number be, for example. What should the net number be? Should it be net zero? Should it be net 50,000? Should it be net 150,000? You could do that. In a sense, if it encourages a sensible debate on the issue, then I think I probably would be quite in favour of it, rather than at the moment where we're getting the opposite, where you're basically being smeared and labelled if you want to debate the levels of immigration. And that's been the problem for too long. No one wants to talk about it. So not only are they still frightened of talking about it, but actually they want to suppress debate about it and smear anybody who wants to talk about it as a far-right thug.
It's a cracking point, Isabel, isn't it? I mean, would that clear things up once and for all?
Well, for full disclosure, Richard is my partner, and we haven't actually discussed this. So I'm quite surprised he's come out with this idea. I mean, in a sense, it sounds like he was responding to something Mike Graham was suggesting. I mean, I don't know about everyone else. I think I'm still recovering from the Brexit referendum. We know how traumatic that was. It wasn't the referendum itself. It was the years of misery that followed it as people refused to accept the result. So I think that gave referenda a bit of a bad name. I'd have other priorities, actually, for a referendum. I would do one on the voting system, which I think is a far more, in a sense, pressing issue to put to the whole country. I actually don't think we need a referendum on immigration. Poll after poll tells you what people think. It tells you that the vast majority of people think far too many people are being allowed in, and almost nobody is in favour of totally losing control of our borders. We don't need to go to millions of pounds worth of expense and all sorts of division and toxicity to establish that. We just need a government that actually sorts it out and starts turning back the boats.
Yeah, I remember the left-wing journalist Ian Dunt, so in about 2014, said to me, and Ian, for those who don't know, Ian's more left-wing than a Venezuelan keep left sign, for goodness sake. But he said, we don't want a referendum on Brexit. I said, oh, it's because you're a Remainer. He went, no, it's actually not that. It's because we're going to have a decade of endless debate after it happens, regardless of how you vote. And it turned out, a rare moment, he was absolutely bang on about that. And you've just alluded to it as well, Isabel. I couldn't go through that again either. So maybe there are other ways. Final story to finish on. Liz Truss storming, well, they say storming, she walked off stage after, well, it was one of those moments where this group called Led by Donkeys, who regularly sort of do these kind of stunts. They did one with Nigel Farage. Liz Truss was in the middle of a sort of a live debate in front of an audience, and for those who are watching, they can see this, and a big banner came down behind her that said, I think it says, I crashed the economy, and a picture of a lettuce. She wasn't very happy, Isabel. What do you make of, I mean, you could say, this is what protest and living in a democracy is all about. Weird stuff happens from time to time.
No, I'm afraid I think that was absolutely pathetic. What a pathetic little stunt. It's now almost 2 years since she left office. We've now got the country under new management, arguably in a far worse state than she left it. There comes a point when this kind of thing is not funny anymore, it's just bullying. And enough is enough with the baiting of Liz Truss. She may be a politician, she's not even a politician anymore.
No,
she lost her seat. And, you know, she puts up with, on a day-to-day basis, the most relentless persecution and bullying and discourtesy and mocking and humiliation, largely from people who have never made any sacrifices for public life whatsoever, have no idea what it was like to walk in her shoes, to try to be Prime Minister of this country. And I think it's downright nasty. And you're right, she didn't storm off stage. She got up and quietly and with some dignity just walked out. And frankly, I really don't blame her.
There it is. Listen, we've got to walk out now, Isabel. Always great to get your view on the big stories of the day. Thank you, Isabel Oakeshott, Talk's international editor, with us on the programme.